back to What's the Truth podcast, where we talk about issues that matter. Today we are with a very special guest, a very good friend of mine, Alex Liwali. Karibu.
Asante.
Let's talk a little about who is Alex. An overview of your upbringing. Where were you born? What does that look like?
Yeah, thank you again. My name is Alex Kamanga Liwali. I self-describe as a creator of possibility, as a producer of opportunities, and a catalyst for growth. So generally, that's where my life has always focused. So this year, by the end of this year, I'll be off the youth bracket. I turned 35. So I was born in the year 1990. I have a mixed, what I would call a mixed background, a mixed heritage. So I was born off in Laikipia, and then early stage in my life, I grew up in Muranga, and then 10 years after, that's the year 2000, I came to Nairobi, and I've been in Nairobi ever since. So that's pretty much what my life in a high level looks like.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to skip straight to university, but before I do that,
Yes.
Is there any within that period before university, is there anything that could have really molded you, that stands out to you, that has made you who you are today?
Yeah, I think who I am today largely is built on growing with my grandparents. So I was brought up by my grandparents, and I've had the unique privilege to, at the very early stage, to have lived with my grandparents on my maternal side. Then I grew a section of my life in an orphanage, then the last part before adulthood with my paternal grandparents. So I feel my worldview is largely shaped by ideas and concepts that I had a lot from my grandparents. And I think that's my philosophy of life. So that has a very large bearing on my life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move to, where did you study, university or college, and what did you actually study?
Yeah, so I'm one of those kids who never really knew what they wanted to do with life. To date, I've never had an ideal career. I never did have one at any given point in my life. So when I left high school, so I had an admission at Pan Africa Christian University. I got admitted, but did not proceed. I had an admission at Strathmore University. I did about half a semester. I did not proceed. I dropped a little bit, went off to Isiolo, started a milk business. Then after 1 year is when I came and went to Technical University of Kenya, and I took legal studies. But of course, I took legal studies because I was looking for the easiest, shortest course that would have graduated very, very, very quickly, and one that I thought was pretty easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent 90% of my university time was spent out of university. So I did legal studies at Technical University of Kenya.
Would it be safe to assume some of the reasons this was happening was financial constraints?
Yes, by and large. Yeah, because again, in Strathmore University, when I got an admission, I was supposed to take a Bachelor of Science in Leadership and Management. But if anyone knows Strathmore University back then, that's around 2011, I think the school fees for a year was somewhere close to 400k Kenya shillings, and I was a self-sponsored student. So even when I got the help, 65k per year, I just figured I don't want to keep fundraising semester after semester after semester. So I felt I needed a course I could afford, and in an university that would allow me to work and at the same time pay my school fees. So that's how I ended up in Technical University of Kenya.
So how has this shaped your worldview, and does it have any bearing, anything that you'd be doing today?
Yeah, I think by virtue of my upbringing, So, like I said a little bit earlier, there is part of my life where I grew in an orphanage. So I believe I lost my mom when I was about 4 years, and I never quite saw my dad again until I was well in adulthood. So from very early stage, I knew wherever my life ends up, I knew it was entirely up to me. So I believe one of the things that drives me today is that from a very early stage, I knew I'll absolutely have no one to blame in life, and I needed to figure out things very, very, very early. So even the choice of a career I was looking for, I was very, very clear. I needed something that I could almost employ myself immediately, or something that would allow me to earn while I was still in school as well. So that has a bearing on that as well.
Okay, so let's now move to, you've done your legal studies. You're still working when doing legal studies. Um, so what's the next move for you? What does it look like? What do you do?
Yeah, so just take you a little bit back. Before picking legal studies, I already knew I wanted to be in business. I had figured that a very long time before. And like I told you, in between, there was a year in between when I dropped from Strathmore University and when I went to Technical University, where I went to Isiolo and started a milk business. And over 1 year period, I had grown that business to a place where we were selling over 1,000 liters of milk per day. So I knew I wanted to go the business way. But I think what really shaped my conviction that I needed to pursue business was in the first year at Technical University. So I spent a majority of my time at the National Library in Upper Hill. And I remember one day I walked in the business and politics section and realized I had read every single book there was. But there's one particular book I read titled "Stay Hungry, Stay Foolish." It's by an Indian-based author, Rashmi Bansal, and the story was about, they were trying to profile about 100 students they had taught who had started businesses. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at every one of those journeys, I could see myself in that journey. So that had a pivotal perspective in terms of my deciding to go into business, because I figured the path I wanted to take was from a perspective of how can I pick a simple idea, turn it into something big that could benefit a lot of people. So I know I'm not wired to do anything routine. I'm driven by, can I pick a simple idea, grow it over time, and it becomes a big idea. So that had a part to play.
So let's go slightly to the milk business.
Yes.
Isiolo.
Yes.
How did you find yourself in Isiolo? What happened? You chose a milk business.
Yeah.
Where were you even sourcing this milk from? Who was the clientele?
Yeah, interesting. And I learned so much from that 1 year period. So growing up, when I was in the orphanage, so I went to a school that it had an orphanage, but it was a private school. So meaning the other kids that were paying school fees were the ones who were paying school fees for us, those who were in the orphanage. So we ended up becoming very good friends with a certain family where their youngest son was my best friend. And I think we grew up very tight till high school, when I went to Njiri school, and then he went to a school in Meru, Burieruri. So we stayed in touch. So by the time now I'm dropping off from Strathmore, mm-hmm. By that time the dad was exporting Mera. And the Mera business that time was booming very, 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 very well. I remember he was doing about 2-3 trips a week, and I mean, it was just a significant amount of money. But he was thinking about what else to do, because it's typically that kind of business that is conducted on phone. You're here in Nairobi, you're calling the guys in Meru, the Mera comes to Isili, it's taken from Isili to Congo, to the UK, to many other markets. So it was pretty much a business he was doing on phone. So he needed something that he was feeling like it was a bit more engaging, something that he needed to be in. Mm-hmm. And all his two sons. I was the only one who had dropped out of university that time. So the elder son was in JKUAT, the other son was in Kisii University. So I was available and I needed something to do. So when he asked me if I was available to try out something, I was down for it. So that family comes from Meru. So what ended up happening is he had quickly figured in his various travels that there was a market for drinks in Meru, but we hadn't thought of milk as potentially one of those drinks. So we had seen, I don't know whether any one of you may remember a drink that used to be known as Vita 500. So I knew it used to be advertised by Rafton back then. So we knew there was a market for drinks, but we figured milk would almost work the exact same way. So we went from a perspective of we were picking milk from from Meru every day, and we transport it to Isiolo. And of course, we started with about 100 liters of milk per day. So it's the kind of milk you buy from farmers. You come and make sure you sell the same day. But what grew out as something small over time became something big, where we even poached some guys from places like KCC who now would negotiate farmers for us. We started paying farmers a bit more higher than anybody else was paying them. Yeah, and over time, we could collect anywhere in the north of 1,000 liters of milk on a per day basis and sell the entire of it on a per day basis. So yeah, that's how that business absolutely came about.
Okay. So now you're done with legal studies. You like business. You've been engaged in business. What next?
So legal studies was an additional eye opener for me, because you will not hear a lot of people who have done legal studies in Kenya. Majority of people, you will hear people have done the typical LLB, so they want to position to become advocates. But legal studies is largely interdisciplinary in that it allows you to have a feel of a couple of disciplines. So it's not just focusing on law. So when I ended up interning a very good law firm known as Mwangi Wahome and Company Advocates, they gave us quite some substantial exposure because they had an SME docket that was good to see, good to learn. I remember they were also patent agents, doing a lot of copyright stuff. So I ended up seeing a little bit of what was happening in the business world as well. I remember like Family Bank was one of the largest clients we had. And at the same time, very high profile clients. Like I remember the Makadara MP, Mike Sonko back then was one of our clients, and I could see what they were doing in business. I had opportunity to, when you are accompanying the senior partners in the law firm, to see a lot of that kind of thing. So it solidified the conviction that I had that I needed to go into business. So naturally, the way then I thought about it was, I knew I wasn't going to practice for long. Even though the law firm had given me a job, I knew I wasn't going to practice for long. So towards the end of my internship at Mwangi Wahome and Company Advocates, I started looking for opportunities. And I came across a volunteer opportunity that was being driven by voluntary services overseas. And it was a simple idea they were doing. So they would pick recent graduates from Kenya, from UK, and many other places, and bring us together to live together. They would put us in host homes. So typically a host home is a family volunteers to take us in. The guys from UK come in, we from Kenya, we live together, we work together. But then they find us places to work, what they used to call placements. So I think for me, it naturally worked that the places they placed me were founders who were in tech. And completely by luck, that's how I ended up now being exposed to the current tech space. But it was from that volunteer opportunity where I had the opportunity to see different businesses, because the way we were expected to work is you are a recent graduate, work with another founder to see how business is actually run, but also contribute the skills that you're coming from uni with. So that was the bridge in between now moving from the legal field to moving into business fully. Yeah.
So let's fast forward to you've gotten this idea, you've seen the problem with jobs, and you've decided, I'm starting what began as Optimac and then became Fundis. So how did you start? What was the initial problem you thought you were solving, and how has it evolved to what you're solving now?
To a large extent, that has not changed. The founders I worked for, BIMO, we were doing a point of sale system for the informal sector, so trying to digitize Dukas and kiosk and micro sellers. And then I moved from that place. So the placement, I'm talking about that volunteer period. So I had already seen an opportunity in the larger informal sector, because now after BIMO, the next place I went was known as in Kisha, what is today known as Tanda Africa. It's now a fintech, Tanda Pay. So when I went to work for that founders, what again we were doing there, we were still working with the informal sector. We had figured out a way to replace plastic bags with eco-friendly bags, but use those eco-friendly bags as marketing space. So what I meant is, as you're buying things from the supermarket, we were providing an alternative where we give you eco-friendly bags, what is now the mainstream in the market today. But we were using that as advertising space. So you'd see Coca-Cola, other bigger brands advertising on that particular space. So I had already interfaced with the informal sector a little bit. So what now is the Fundis dream today? When we started as Optimac, it was first of all largely driven by infrastructural development in Kenya. So Thika Road, for example, was being built around 2014, 2015. 2016, and that's the period now when I'm coming out. So I end up meeting up friends who were in the construction space. One was working for a Chinese construction company. I believe it must be China Wui. And the other one was working for a very high-end Asian construction company that has been around for a very long time, Sayani Brothers. And both these guys had graduated from Dedan Kimathi University around the same time I left Technical University. So they kept talking to me about challenges they were seeing in the various construction sites that they were managing. Mm-hmm. So to give you a good example, so you are a site manager, you need 10 steel fixers, 100 guys have shown up at the gate. Everybody is saying, I'm a steel fixer. They do not have resumes. They do not have any certifications. They do not have anything to present to you that would ascertain that I have the skill I'm saying I have. So to a large extent, I'm living a dream that they are the ones who brought it to my attention. So naturally, we thought the way to solve that problem was to build a labor subcontracting agency, which is what we called Optimac Labor Solutions. But again, this is the first time we were building a business. We were inexperienced. We had never done this on our own. So we thought the moment we go and talk to contractors in Kenya, we thought this was something they were going to run for. They were going to pick very, very, very quickly. But in about 6 months, and I believe every single week, up to 3-4 days, we were spending talking to artisans on construction sites, talking to foremen, talking to construction-based professionals. In 6 months' time, we knew this wasn't going to work. And this was largely because of the kind of ambition we had and what we thought we would change. So construction companies would simply think that for us to provide the solution for labor, they imagined that we were simply taking what artisans charge, we add our markup, and then we try to charge them. So the perception of the market was, if I'm to provide you a better qualified artisans, it's also because you want to charge me more for that. So that did not pick very well, but an insight came about. We learned very, very quickly that the same artisan who works in a construction site is the same guy you will call for a simple repairs and maintenance gig at home. And that's where we pivoted and moved to now what is Fundis up today. The idea simply was, we can now do this with tech. Instead of just doing a labor subcontracting agency, let's figure out how to do this massively with tech. And that's how we moved into Fundis. So the dream remains. Again, although we started with construction, we believe it's a solution that can grow to all informal sector workers. regardless the industry. So the dream remains as it was from day one.
Could you share some data on how many jobs you might have completed till to date? How many artisans have you engaged? Any partnerships
Yeah.
that you've been able to do? How far is Fundis today?
Yeah. So this year we turned 5 years. That is, we officially incorporated in Kenya on May 2nd, 2019. So actually 2024 May we turned 5 years. But over the time, we also ended up now incorporating in the US. We incorporated in the US in November 2022. So we are going about the third year now. But it has been overall a very engaging journey. And especially because at the start out, I think I had the opportunity to handle at least the first 500 jobs that we ever did. That's 2018, 2019. So where we are today, I believe we must have today interfaced with maybe over 10,000 artisans up to date. That is in the last 5 years. And by interfacing, I mean either we have given an overall, or we have engaged with an artisan, or we have had a meeting, or we have trained. But we got a bit more solidly focused on data from the beginning of the year 2022. So from 2022 to now, this month we just crossed, I believe, over 3,000 artisans that we have interacted with. From a perspective of we have assessed, we have upskilled, we have certified, and we are now thinking about how to empower their jobs. But something also significant happened last year, where now we started focusing on how do we approach what we are doing from an educational perspective. And educational perspective, I mean, if, for example, an artisan has been in the industry for 20 years and they never had an opportunity to get a certificate, how do we support them to prepare for a trade test, book for an exam, do an exam, and get a certificate? So overall, that new curve is almost where I would say now we have entered into stage 2 of our dream, where we are now moving towards starting to count the number of people we have enabled to be able to get these kinds of certifications. But overall, we are now in 6 counties. This year, I believe we'll be able to cover the entire country. And yeah, ambitiously, we believe by next year we should be able to be moving out of the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've touched on the educational bit, recognition of prior learning, but just before that, I want to move slightly back to job placement.
Yes.
And quality assurance aspects.
Yes.
What have you built that allows for this, apart from the educational aspect? Any other, because that we are going to touch on?
Yeah. And typically I say that is the biggest innovation that Fundis App has brought into the market. So I would want you to think about the example I gave you earlier. You are a site manager. 100 people have shown up at the construction site, and you need only 10. So be as it may, you must turn away 90, and you need some sort of methodology to decide who are the 10 who get to work, and then 90 can go back home. So we ended up understanding, by the time we were getting to end of 2021, this is during the COVID season, we ended up understanding that there needs be a sort of a resume builder, a sort of a professional CV builder for informal sector workers.
Mm-hmm.
So to a large extent, what you called quality assurance, the way we have built it is, if let's say I've been a painter for the last 15 years, how do I document what I have done in a way it can be visible and be presented to anybody who wants to understand what you've done in the past, in a way that it can build confidence that the person I'm about to engage, I know what they have done, where they have been, what they have done. So right now we are calling it a professional resume builder that we have done in the last 3 years that allows you, regardless who you are, you can create a digitized profile. And this profile includes things like who am I? What's my skill type? Where have I worked? Where have I gotten recommendations? Who can vouch for my character? Can projects I have done in the past be seen? Can ratings be seen? Can recommendations from people to others be seen? So that's the largest engine currently we have built that even allows guys to be able to build in terms of exposures they have done by themselves. Let's say if I was a plumber and over time I've now learned how to do painting, I can be able to reflect that in a very, 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 very visible, nice way. So what you've talked about quality assurance, we've started it from a resume builder. Then on top of that, from thinking about how do we do security checks? Typically, how do we do background checks? How do we ascertain you don't have a criminal record? How do we give customers the peace of mind that the person we are sending you is not just another person from the road? So there's a lot of packaging we have done there, but just think of it as a professional resume builder. Think about LinkedIn, but for somebody who is in the informal sector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually just noticed some of us might be watching and not even aware that I work at Fundis. So I might have some inside information. So ideally, then most businesses would really want to build the quality assurance aspect, like what you're saying now that we're moving into the educational aspect. And ideally, as an entrepreneur, it's as initial sunk cost. So we've managed in a way to build it out and still have the what you would call ongoing usual business, and we have this aspects that would be even as far as to even call impact based. How I know, but for those watching, what happened there? How have you been able to make this possible?
Yeah. In fact, lately, and maybe I may not have gotten an opportunity to share that with you, but lately I've actually found a better example to actually crystallize what you just described. So right now we are heavily talking about guys who are trying to innovate for, let's say, space travel and all those kinds of things. There is a lot of what those guys are doing that would typically be seen as a sunk cost. A sunk cost for me is something you're investing money in right now, but there is no visible pathway on what the return will look like. It is the equivalence of the guys who are building, guys who we would call the pioneers of the internet revolution.
Yeah.
So right now it's very simple for anybody to build a software-based company because there's something like the internet. But I believe there's a time when there were innovators who are talking about computing and computing power at a time when internet was not mainstream. Now, to move that back to our case, what we have done in terms of training, assessment, building background checks is things that have no
curriculum
development, is things that have no monetary return right now. But it's just like the example of sowing and expecting to reap. In my view now, I see it from perspective of there are things we needed to build in place that we would not have been able to do anything else unless those things were in place. It's like you can't move cargoes if the rail is not in place. So that, in our case, was the rail. So we needed to do all those things: curriculum development, assessment, upskilling, all those kinds of things. And back then, in those 3 years, it had no financial returns in view, like straight on financial returns. But I believe we have now moved in the next 2 years where the same people we were investing into in terms of assessment, training, upskilling are now starting to pay us directly. The artisan is now in a place where they afford to be able to pay you back, and you can build a revenue model based on them. And of course, I believe that's just the start of things. I believe the next 3 to 5 years, we will be able to see the hard work that we did 3 years ago in terms of the training and doing all that. But of course, in the meantime, we have had to do a lot of grants and impact money just to balance that as well.
We'll come to fundraising.
Yeah.
So let's now move to the educational aspect of the business. So this has involved a lot of training, curriculum development, partnerships with some government bodies,
Yes.
TVETs, and so on. And so, how has that process been like? What has the certification process been like? What has the training been like?
Mm.
Has it been quite easy to
Yeah.
find the people to do this with? Is the uptake from the artisans
Yeah.
good? And finally, just also now speak on the recognition of prior learning, even as you do that.
Yeah. So again, I would say it has been a journey in evolution. I think uh, we started this in 2022, end of 2020, end of 2021, beginning of 2022 is when we started thinking about, hey, the thing that we've been doing could potentially have educational effects. But back then, the thought wasn't as clear as it is now, because back then we weren't even talking about recognition of prior learning, which is now something that is a buzzword. Maybe in the last 6 months, that's a buzzword. People are talking about recognition of prior learning. If you may remember the case of a guy who was claimed to have been representing a number of cases in court, and he had not joined the bar. So the recognition of prior learning conversation is now something people are aware about. But in 2022, the idea was simple. We completely by default started by thinking about what does it take to have a good artisan. It wasn't about, oh, we thought we were going to be an educational player. No. That was not anywhere in sight. The thing was, what makes you as Amos to want to come to Fundis App and request for a plumber, request for an appliance fixer, as opposed to calling a friend who might have a friend, who might have a friend, who might have a guy who could fix your issue. So we started from perspective of thinking about, all right, so if I present you 3 plumbers or 3 electricians, one has 15 years of being self-taught. Another one has an electrical engineering degree. Another one has a NEC certification. Another one is telling you they are self-taught, but they have also done a bit of exposures here and there in the industry. Amongst those 4, how do you pick the right electrician to send into a customer's house? So we ended up thinking from a perspective of, let's observe on every single job we are getting. Let's learn, what does a good carpenter look like? What does a good plumber look like? But then by the end of 2022, it was becoming clearer that there is an educational effect, that there's some primary difference between somebody who has gone to school and somebody who has not. There is a primary experience between somebody who has 5 years experience and somebody who has 6 months experience. So now, coming into the educational space, we were now quite aware that education has a place to play. Be as it may, however, we were not relying on those particular certifications, because we have seen people with certifications but no experience whatsoever. So you're coming off from school, you have learned the theory bit, but you can't do the practical bit. So we needed to find a right balance of the two. And that's where our educational journey now started. So we started seeing that the more unexperienced an artisan is, the more likely they are to be able to do a good job. The challenge then is today is a majority of vacancies, be it in Kenya, be it regionally, be it continentally, be it globally, are starting to require some sort of proof that the person who is saying can do this job actually can show they can do the job. And a proof could be in the form of a recommendation. It could be in the form of a CV. It could be even in the form of somebody being able to vouch that I have actually seen this guy's job. Think of it this way. You go somewhere, you see a very good painting job, and you are likely to ask, who did this painting job for you? So we took those two things and now started building our own system. And our own system is now built on the aspect that we do not prioritize experience over papers. We do not prioritize papers over experience. We find a way to establish what is a good yardstick for a good plumber. So it's a fusion, it's a right balance of the two. So what now started in terms of thinking of can we build a qualification for Fundis app that becomes an industry standard, ended up moving us to find partners. Can we find partners in the market who perhaps they have done this before? And of course, again, interestingly, even till now, there are not so many. I think the best example of what I have really seen, long before the recognition of prior learning, I've only met one guy who is currently running what is known as the Mafundi wa Kenya Association. It's the only cooperative society for artisans. That is the only guy I have met over the many years who can say he picked over 200 people, trained each one of them, booked examinations for them, and they did examinations and they passed. But the biggest pain he has today is that he feels that none of those guys acknowledges that he's the one who did that for them. All of them became really, really, really good industry practitioners. Nobody points their success back to him. So today he's trying to think about how do we do that in a more formalized place, and that's where we are partnering. So we have ended up doing a lot of partnerships, for example, with the Kenya Association for Certified Training Providers for Industry, known as CASET. We are still doing a lot of work together. Mafundi wa Kenya Association, of course, now we have moved to that perspective of seeing what we can do for the next 5 years. We have interfaced even with the likes of the National Construction Authority itself. We have interfaced with NITA. So I would say progressively we are in a place where we have ended up even now starting to talk to practitioners in the solar industry. For example, solar trainers, manufacturers in the solar space, global companies that are coming into Kenya, let's say the likes of Bosch and many others. So I think it's work in progress. I usually feel like every 2 years, something new is going to show up in our industry, and we have to position to move in that direction. So I think we have pretty much collaborated with all manner of organizations you can think about, from insurance agencies, underwriters, credit lenders, background checkouts. I mean, anything you can think about that would make the informal space start to look formal. We have interfaced with them.
So you've now gotten to a point you're even talking about gig economy in a whole. So I'd just like to touch slightly on that. How has it evolved? What have we seen happen in the gig economy for the past 2 years, and what is it looking like? Again, also, there have been people who've been in the space who've been trying. We've not been by ourselves. What would you say? How are they faring? Where does Fundis beat them against what they're doing, and how are we different?
As a disclaimer, first off, what people are calling gig economy is really nothing new. When I lived in the village, early childhood, I still remember guys who would come in your shamba, whether it's when we are doing the digging, the cultivating periods, or the planting or the harvesting. I would still remember guys who would come to your farm. They work from morning to lunchtime. They are paid 100 bob, and maybe on top of it, they are given lunch, githeri or a cup of uji.
Yeah.
What we are now calling the gig economy is what has always been around in Africa as kibarua. And kibarua is directly the Swahili translation for a gig.
Yeah.
What people call a gig is a kibarua. Kibarua is something that is short-term in nature. The engagement is such that it's paid on a per task based. And when you now bring the internet into that kibarua bit, is where now we have the gig economy, what guys are calling as the gig economy. But truly, what has now changed, what we are now calling the gig economy, what has now evolved is what digital technologies are able to do this. Unlike in the olden days that a farmer would not have been able to kulima several shambas at a go. But right now, even back at home, I know people who have organized themselves and they're actually negotiating with farmers. You negotiate with us. We give you farmers for your shamba today, and then I'm giving another two in another. So they're actually people who are now formalizing the kibarua guys who are typical hard diggers, hard laborers, and negotiating on their behalf with farmers and farm owners. Mm-hmm. That is the exact same thing that is happening in the gig economy, where if you think about a graphics designer and many other graphics designer in the market, when now they have an opportunity that is almost a launching pad. So a DJ, a bouncer, a chef, a graphics designer, now they get an opportunity to have a harmonized platform. Because again, Kibarua, as you think about it, there's a lot of fragmentation from a perspective of, even if I am a hard labor, I don't know which farm needs farmers today, which one needs farmers tomorrow. So it's about demand and supply. So with the advent of the gig economy, what has now happened is the rise of platforms that we now call aggregators. You pick on the demand side, you pick on the supply side, you bring them together, and we now structure what needs to happen, or we make it more functional. So the gig economy right now, and going into the next, maybe 10 years since COVID, it's the new way of work. It's how primarily a lot of guys will do their career growth and their career prospects. So that's where Fundis now plays in alongside many others. So I think in Africa, there has not been so many of those kinds of very successful platforms. But if you think about globally, we have seen platforms that have turned into being unicorns, companies with a valuation of $1 billion USD. And I think many more will come over the year. So if you think about Kenya, for instance, we have been privileged to be in this space, I believe, for 5 years officially since incorporation. But we usually say we had 1 year before that where we had not registered a company, but we were playing around ideas that we thought could work in the long run. So I've seen so many other companies that have come into the space. But the way now I would want to differentiate where we are in the larger gig economy, as you call this, is we have players that are playing around what you'd say needs sophisticated talent. Mm-hmm. Take, for example, guys you are a software developer. For you to find work through a gig platform, you are providing a very highly technical skill. So you'd find their platform serving that space. Think of the Gebeas, the Andelas, and many other companies that people will hear about. Then you come to a midpoint where now there is a type of gig work that needs mid-level types of digital skills. You're thinking about translators, transcriptions. If anybody from the university and having graduated, you have done online writing, all those guys in that space. Then you come to the third category, which is the largest, which is where we now are. It's what you'd call online to offline. Work that must be delivered one way or the other through human interface, through human interaction. So this is where you have your typical Ubers, you have your typical Airbnbs, you have your typical Glovos, you have Fundis in that as well. There is no way that gig is going to be delivered without a primary interface between the driver and you, the passenger, or the plumber and the household. So that's where the biggest thing is going to happen, because over 85% of jobs in Africa are in the informal sector, which is where the Ubers, the Glovos, the Fundis, that's where we are. So I think that's where there is the biggest potential to change not just jobs, but whole societies. Because typically in Kenya, if we're talking about 85% of jobs being in the informal sector, we're talking about a little over 16 million Kenyans. Mm-hmm. 16 million Kenyans in the informal sectors. Think about how many families they are supporting, spouses and children and next of kin. So that's where the biggest potential of growth in the gig economy is going to come. And especially now with the conversation on AI and everything else that we are talking about now. So that's how I would see that particular gig space.
So to be more specific about gig economy, we would be classified in the job tech. And we, however, have built other products, what you would say outside of just usual placements. Would even go as far as to even say now we are an ed tech company. What's the wisdom in building out all these embedded finance products? We've spoken of insurance, credit, reference bureau to some degree, or lack of a better word, or reference checking. So
again, let me give you this simple insight. So there's a saying I normally use, and I say that experiences are as distinct from goods and services as goods are from services. If you think about any successful company in the last 10 years in the tech space that you can think about, it's fundamentally a business that is a platform. Now, platforms are very different from technology companies. If you think about Facebook, Facebook is a platform. Amazon is a platform. Airbnb is a platform. Uber is a platform. The fundamentals around platforms are very, very, very different from traditional businesses. It's what we call blitzscaling, and interpreted that term means prioritizing speed over efficiency. How do I grow? I'm not so much caring on the actual experience, whether it's good or bad, but I'm moving at a neck-breaking speed so that I can capture a larger market. So that's how unicorns are built. And when you think about all those businesses are platforms. Now, to come to your question, should job tech, prop tech, ed tech, insert tech, whatever it is, you can put Fundis as around. Essentially, Fundis is a platform, and by definition is we are helping several market segments to interface on our platform. And there is a potential to build a new business or a new company in every one of those intersections. For example, if I took the intersection between employers and artisans, it is possible to build that as a standalone company and scale it globally as a standalone company. If I took the interface between artisans and assessors, you can build a new business there. If I think about artisans and manufacturers, you can build a new business, standalone business there. So the unit of economics become very different when you now want to say you want to do all the things together. Mm-hmm. You are actually bringing value chains entirely into one. So Facebook started with me and you being able to engage, being able to chat, being able to comment on one another's posts. But then on top of it, they built advertisers. If you think about now them acquiring Instagram, acquiring WhatsApp, all these other things that come alongside. So we started out as a job tech, purely thinking we were doing the job matching part. But then we started thinking about, hey, if I find an artisan who has 15 years of experience and they don't have a certification, and enable them to get assessed so that we can see their knowledge, skills, and competency gaps, and we help them meet those, suddenly we have become an edtech, because now we are purely focused on educational outcomes. But then you pick the same artisans and say, if we have already seen data that 4 in 5 jobs that they do, there is a component of them being unable to fulfill that job because I couldn't buy a spare part and things like those. Suddenly now you become a fintech from a perspective of whether it's lending or it's digitizing transactions. So the way I see it is the advantage we have of being a platform. We can actually focus and say, every one new year, we want to make sure this new business does very, very, very well, stands alone by itself. So for example, job tech, we've already figured that, and we are a huge player in the job tech space. You can't talk about job tech without putting Fundis in that ecosystem. In the last 1 year, we now significantly are in the top brass in the royalty of edtech companies in Africa. Why? Because, by the end of that last year, we have already enabled over 3,000 artisans to be able to acquire skills and get certification. So we are now an edtech player. But then we have now in the last 6 months as well started thinking about loans. And it's again simple. You're not trying to focus on something very, very different. You're simply saying, hey, if I take the artisan that I have on the Fundis platform that I've been enabling to find jobs, and I can see how many jobs they do in a week, how many jobs they do in a month, I'm pretty much seated in a place where I can provide the data and the insight that anybody who wants to lend to this Fundi can be able to look at that data and know, if we give this guy 10,000, is he going to be able to pay in the next 3 months? So I feel we are now evolving into, it's not just embedded fintech. I actually now see it as full-fledged fintech from a perspective of the day we get the licenses, let's say start lending our own money as opposed to lending somebody else's money. We will have fully enabled all that payments and not just being embedded. And we can move all the way. Now I'm looking at it from a perspective of everything we have done up to date was purely focused on the facilities management.
Mm-hmm.
Although people are not seeing that, we are actually a prop tech as well. And that's why you see us participating in prop tech conversations, because we are providing technology that enables property management.
Yeah.
That will extend eventually. Should we enable contractors and players in there to be able to have, better turnarounds around their projects, have visibility around materials, around workers, they are not ghost workers in the space, enable them to make payments that you don't have to carry money in a sack or carry a lot of money to pay people at the end of the day. So again, it's a beauty of platforms. That's how Amazon has evolved to even what we now call Amazon Web Services today, where now we are actually hosting as tech companies on what infrastructure Amazon has built. So I think there's no limit to look again, even the trajectory Zoho is taking. Right now, founders are choosing, guys are starting to migrate from AWS to Zoho.
Mm.
But typically Zoho would have been seen as a QuickBooks competitor.
Yeah.
So I think the beauty in being a platform is virtually, because of all those multiple interactions, you can build anything you want now and in the future. Yeah.
We have two main topics that we need to talk about before we end. We have fundraising and we have the tech build. So let's just move to fundraising because it's closer to what you're talking about. I think we had buried our heads, or myself, let me say, I'd buried my heads so much into the fact that I was not as interacting as much with people out here fundraising. I was pretty much, the conversation was always, and I'm coming out and I'm noticing entrepreneurs, startups, when they look at us, they think, or there's something they can learn from us, because we have had some strides, we've made some headway in fundraising. What has that journey been like? What have we been able to not sell per se? How have we been able to bring in these investors so that they can see that we can collaborate with them? Has anything changed between when we started fundraising and our view of fundraising to today? Are we talking to different people? Are we still talking to the same people? In the future, are we looking to still talk to the same, or is there different spaces of fundraising we're looking at?
And again, fundraising is interesting because I think one of the lessons in the last 3 years is there is never an end to fundraising, no matter the level you are in. Whether you are in day 1 or you are in year 10, fundraising is a non-stop game, and it's simply because of really fundraising is not just for the mere sake of fundraising. Fundraising is actually to be able to find the business resources that you actually need to deliver the value you want to deliver. So how has that grown the last 3 years? One, I think we are now at a better position in terms of understanding investor readiness, investor requirement, investor language, the diction there, and just even positioning for your next fundraising.
Yeah.
So I've learned by experience, contrary to how a majority of us do, the best time to raise money is not when you need it. The best time to raise money is when you don't need it. And you need to fundraise quickly so that you get back to building the business. Like, you should time it in such a way that ultimately money raised from whatsoever source is for purposes of delivering value. So in the last 5 years, we have been incredibly privileged to have, I believe, between ourselves, maybe we have talked to over 300 people by now. Or even
1,000.
more than that. At least to where, I see where we are coming from, where we are going. And I think we'll still keep accelerating on that and doubling down on that. Because again, it's just the same rule on salesmanship, that every 5 sales calls end with a no, and that is in the best of times. But it's the 1 yes that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
So in those many hundreds of investor meetups, investor calls, investor pitches that we have done, some of them have materialized, and we've been able to utilize that money to get to where we are. So obviously, I feel like no matter where you are in capital raising, there is always a next level. There's somebody who can learn from you and somebody you need to learn from, because, I mean, if somebody has raised more than you, you need to learn from them. But if you have raised more than somebody else, that somebody needs to learn from you. So I think we're positioned in a place where I feel we are supporting many other startups right now, directly as Fundis and also in individual capacities who are trying to fundraise. But we are equally talking to many others who are ahead of us in fundraising. So I feel like I wouldn't complain as to where we are. We haven't done 100% of what needed to be done. We have learned a lot. And of course, we now are in a space where we're saying in 2025, we hope to have fully now finished covering the entire country. So meaning we are focusing at 2026, for example, markets like Tanzania that we feel have a lot of similarity to ours. It means we need to be on the road again, fundraising for that next shift. So I feel we're also in a place where we are now looking at, okay, how do we start making back some money for some of our early investors? So, and that's a good place to be. Having conversations around, somebody gave you money 2 years ago and you're looking at how you can reward them significantly now so that you can take on new money. But equally, I feel we have also learned a lot on the optics of fundraising from a perspective of the best source of money is your customers. Be as it may, after all is said and done, the best source of money is sales, is your customers. And of course, you usually need at some point external money to do more than the money your customers are giving you. But as long as you have money from your customers, it attracts any other money you may need from anybody else, because anybody giving you money is giving you for a return. So I feel we have, it's a shape shifter where at every new year it takes a new shape. And I'm excited to see what it's going to look like. We are still fundraising now, aggressively, dilutive money. And dilutive money, I mean, where we are selling out portions of the company, but equally impact money that we don't need to return to owners. So including even if it's grants from government. So let's see how that goes in the next 2 years.
This would be now to any investor who's listening. What kind of capital have you needed? What have been the slight mishaps between what Fundis has needed and fund managers, where the expectations has been a bit off or the requirements has been a bit off? And yes, we have made a deal, but the adjustment was, it negatively impacted on the business.
Just to be sure I understand, is that from a perspective of money that we've already taken?
And
or money we want to take?
Turned down.
Okay. Again, it sounds really bad when somebody hears, there are monies you have gotten that you have said no to. And of course, there are money you have wanted that you really hope to get and then you are said no to. And that's the rule of the game. But I think we have had, even as far as acquisition offers, somebody places an offer to acquire you and of course build and take this to a different direction. I think we have stuck to our core, and our core meaning our conviction in terms of why we started this and why we are still doing this. We believe we may get to a point where we are building to sell, but we are not there yet. We are building to last right now. And building to last means there are several stages we must approach what we are doing. For example, phase 1 was making sure we get the experience right for the job seeker and the employer. And that we have done. And now we are in phase 2 where we are getting the experience right for the job seeker. Be it that job seeker is the one that is looking to be employed or is self-employed. And we need to get that right. That's where we are now focused on EdTech. We are focused on insurance. We are focused on loans. We are even now focused on people who may be desirous of getting jobs abroad. Now, the third phase that I believe we will get into is the phase a lot of investors who have turned us down expect us to be in that phase. In terms of job tech and EdTech, and I think job tech and EdTech are two spaces that are trailing behind. If you think about health tech, agri tech, insa tech, all these other spaces, edtech and job tech. In fact, job tech is relatively new.
Yeah.
EdTech, in my view, is a little bit ahead of job tech. So I feel when an investor has been investing in fintech, they are used to quick turnaround periods. I believe job tech is where fintech was 10 years ago. So if a fintech investor is giving you money now as a job tech, you're not going to make them back the money they want that quick. However, the moment now we have built, they had to build things. For example, there was no getting around building a curriculum because there was no one to duplicate a curriculum from. You can't take a Canadian or a Qatari curriculum and do it in Kenya. You needed to build that ground up. And we would not have been able to go and take the formal training curriculum that is done in TVET because we are not a TVET player at an educational level. We were working on professional development, skills, and people who are already working. So we needed to build that ground up. We needed to define what the curriculum is going to look like, what progression looks like, and there was no getting away from that. So I feel now we have built the fundamentals. We are now saying, hey, so you may have said no to us because we wouldn't have been able to scale as quickly as we would have wanted. There was no way we were going to move in covering the entire East Africa in 3 months or 6 months like other companies are doing. We needed to understand. So the Kenyan TVET system is different from Uganda, from Tanzania, from Zambia. But we have now built a EdTech framework that is plug and play. We can move to Uganda tomorrow and fine-tune the Ugandan TVET curriculum, and especially if there are compliance elements. Let's say, I'm sure there must be a body in Uganda that is in charge of curriculum development at every educational level. We can now plug and play and get our curriculum approved. And we would be able to roll that out in many countries as we move. But equally, for investors who have already given us money, we are also learning that it's easy to say this is what I'm going to build until after I've given you the money and you go and experiment. Learnings and insights come. For example, there are things we have had to throw away that we thought were going to work that no longer will work. And there are things we're embracing as we move. So I feel we sit pretty well for guys who said no to us, guys we said no to, and guys who have given us their money and they're expecting to make a return on their money. We are all learning. And I feel the other biggest challenge I have seen talking to investors is investors who are coming from other markets who imagine that the Silicon Savannah works as the Silicon Valley does. And I think that's an erroneous perspective that because Amazon was able to scale in 4 years, you expected as Fundis App, you need to scale in 4 years the exact same way. It doesn't always work the same way. So I feel also investors, especially who are coming from other markets to African markets, should build on the work that local investors have built. There are challenges you will feel us having with foreign markets investors that we don't have with our local investors, because our local investors understand the reality of the markets we are in. They understand how quickly you can turn things around. And I feel it's managing expectations for everybody, including startups. I think one of the aggressive things I'm doing right now is to start understanding, when I'm talking to Silicon Valley investors especially, the optics are very, very, very different. The language is very different. How they understand marketplaces is very, 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 very different. And I have to fine-tune myself to come up to their speed and to their language and to their level. And that's also schooling every day for founders and management. So I think I would approach it all jumbled up that way.
So are we imploring to have more African fund managers, even if the fund is foreign-based? They should have in their employ a couple of African.
I completely think that's the way to go. That I'll give a good example. That I was talking to an investor quite recently who made a statement that made me think, although I didn't say it, but made me think how clueless that investor is. So the investor asked me, why should they invest in me when it's very, very, very easy for somebody seated in Netherlands or in a European market to build the exact same thing and launch it in Africa without coming to Africa. And I was like, oh my God, this guy is completely clueless that this thing is not about technology. This thing is about understanding the market dynamics, understanding how to even do distribution. And those things you can't do if you are not on ground. So I think even funds, the guys with the money, need to embed themselves with the guys who understand the market. So I feel actually there should be an intentional collaboration between, be it funds that are already established in Africa and funds that are coming to Africa, but that extends to fund managers as well. An intentional notes comparing. If I'm a fund manager that is looking at a deal in Africa, I should talk to fund managers that have been invested in these types of companies. What are the optics? What are the fundamentals? What should I look for? And if possible, even leverage on those that are already there, even do things like DD and all those. I think it would work better for everybody in the long run.
So now let's move to the last topic, which is quite touchy for most, especially those who are in the early stage. If you're building a tech company, then tech becomes a huge component. And so as you continue, the severity of how serious or the challenge is changes.
Yeah.
This is something we battled with quite seriously and
we are
excessively.
currently battling. Yeah.
It's always going to be a problem as long as you're a tech
Yes.
business. The severity is what might change slightly. I also saw a report recently that Kenyan, especially it was saying Kenyan coders, they take 2 or 3 jobs and it becomes a challenge for the companies.
Yeah.
What that journey? I can see you're laughing because
Yeah.
you know. So what has that journey been like? Again, also, as a your background is not from technology. When we've been sent stacks and documents that you can't even verify.
Yeah.
What has that been like? How has that evolved from what we would say, was it late 2021 to today?
And I mean, shockingly, so we about towards just a couple of days before Christmas, so we had the incredible opportunity to host Sam Geshuru of Nilab, Kidato, Kuhasol in our offices, just talking to first-time founders. And I was so shocked to hear him talk about the exact same thing. And I'm thinking I have that challenge because I'm an tech founder. And he's actually a tech founder. He understands tech. He has been in it longer. These are the guys who pioneered this particular industry. And then he was giving us a joke of, so he needed to fire a dev. And so they met up for coffee. So you have your MacBook open. The dev has his MacBook open. And as soon as he told the dev that his job, is no longer going to be there. And I don't remember whether he was talking about himself or a friend of his who had that experience. So as soon as he told the dev that, we now have, this is the end for us. So we have to let you go. So the guy closed his laptop and then closed the other laptop and carried both of them and put them in his bag and he left. And we were trying to talk about just the culture of devs. It turns out it's not just Kenya that you're experiencing this. And I think for us, we have lost source code. We have woken one day, we are told, no, the code is no longer there. The code does not exist. And we've had to rebuild and rebuild. And it's interestingly a shocker that I'm seeing so many other people going through the exact same thing. I recently had a scenario where somebody has booked a hotel, a very high-end hotel for launch. He has invited investors, guests, all stakeholders, and then the day of the launch, there is no code. The code has not been launched. You have incurred money. And the guy that was even building this is no longer even picking your calls. So I think what we have now gotten good at is not really understanding how to code, because I think it's not in the best interest of my time nor yours to learn how to code now, because I've explored at some point that, hey, this is not rocket science. If I give myself 6 months, I can't become a dev, because you've been frustrated by devs. But I'm thinking, how I've now seen it working more efficiently is dev management.
Yeah.
I think dev management is something managers at all level, and especially non-tech founders and even tech founders, because I think one of the things I've seen even tech managers who really understand tech resign because of the pressure that comes from managing other techies. So I see dev management as a key thing from a perspective of so I have a friend who is running a company here in Kenya who has completely kept his tech team as a ghost, and meaning nobody knows who his tech people are, where they are based. He even has devs in Iran, but the way he has built it is every person building a piece is like if we are building a house, somebody is building the kitchen, somebody is building the washroom, somebody is dealing with the living area, somebody is dealing with the balcony, and then once everybody is done, you fuse those things together.
It's beginning to sound like a Telegram dev team.
So it's largely that, but now what has really worked for us is now fully never functioning without a product manager. I think that's what is now taking shape, because a product manager is typically not fully on the business development team and not fully on the tech team. They understand the tech team.
Yeah.
Some of them can even code, but they can actually also build business as if they were just techies themselves. So I feel product management is what has worked for us from a perspective of being able to determine needs, being able to determine this is what we need, this is what we're going to be hiring for 2 years from now, these are the devs we need to go. That allows us even to now hire devs in multiple countries. That we don't need to primarily be in Nigeria or in Zimbabwe or in South Africa, but we can work with devs anywhere in the world. Yeah, so I think product management and dev management is where.
I think that relationship was one of the biggest issues we were having, because we are seeing the clients need this and the devs are not.
They have and again, for good reasons. You are looking at a feature, and by the way, this is very, very, very easy, and that's why I say this is actually still evolving. So what happened in the last 6 months, we had again to almost build the platform ground up, because we now realized we were downplaying the edtech side of things, and we needed now to build aggressively on that side of things. So you and I sometimes will sit and imagine this feature, how is this feature taking 2 days to build? But we are not conscious of how many other things that have to be done. For example, if it's something on the mobile, maybe it has an endpoint on front end, it has an endpoint on back end, and you're not conscious about all those things. You are thinking now, this feature, customer needs it now, we need it done now. We are not conscious about how long it needs to be planned for, what needs to happen. So I think dev management is one of those things that have enabled us to now be able to even manage expectations. Yeah. That you have somebody who understands this side and understand this side and how that needs to happen. But ultimately, I think non-tech founders have a lot of work to do. What I would say, computer science for non-tech founders, like, all right, so I may not need to code, but I need to know how code works generally.
Yeah.
Right? If we are talking about tech stacks, if we are even getting into due diligences, there's some, just like financial language, you may not have, as a manager, you may not have a finance background, but there's some basic diction you need to know and basic fundamentals you need to have. I think that's the same for anybody who is in tech. There's a bare minimum of what you need to have to be able even intelligently deal with devs.
Yeah. I think we underestimated how much it would cost.
And that is similar to anybody that has built a house.
Yeah.
It ends up costing more than you thought it would and taking longer than you expected. So, and I think product management, just like you'd have project management in construction, product management helps to actually bridge the gap in between what is reality and what's expectation and what is doable. But I guess it's not unique to us. It's everybody else. I keep hearing from others who are even ahead of us. guys who have had crazy outcomes than what we have had in the last 3 years. Yeah.
So how have you been able to manage this cost from, because I think we were bleeding a lot of money on the tech end in the beginning. However, now we are a bit more stable on it. What has shifted? I know the product management has helped
Yeah. Yes.
a huge load, but what else has shifted? Probably even it could be sourcing of the actual devs, or what exactly has
Yeah.
enabled it to be sustainable?
I think largely for us, because we have pretty much had a sustained structure, is cost management first off. So there are things that are more infrastructural in nature that have nothing to do with the devs. For example, where are you hosting? What are you hosting? Does everything need to be hosted there? Why do I have multiple places where I'm hosting this and that and the other? So first of all, cost management from a perspective of paying only for what you need. That is like very, very, very key. But then the incredible thing, and you mentioned it earlier when you asked a different question, was on even devs being on multiple jobs. So especially when you are paying somebody, let's say on a monthly basis, and you're not tracking the amount of hours that they're actually working. Tasks management is a key thing that I need to know on a typical, and of course you're not going to be able to prevent devs from having side gigs. It's just the nature of things. It's just how they are working. Most of them work remote, so you're not going to be able to manage somebody working for you and working for 5 other people. But we fundamentally need to agree, how many hours do you plug on a daily basis? That is Fundis hours, right? That in these 6 hours you're not touching anything else. If you now know this person is available 4 hours, you can be able to work back and say, how many hours do they need to plug in a month? And we work out on maximizing tasks and paying on what you're actually being able to deliver for us. So initially, we were imagining that somebody is working the same number of hours you're working when you're here in Kenya. But sometimes if you give somebody a deadline and you say, no, we need this thing done by Friday, it's likely going to happen that they will not touch it on Monday, they will not do it on Tuesday, they will not do it on Thursday. 3 hours, 4 hours to the Friday deadline is when they will do it. So somebody took 5 days of a task they did in 4 hours, but you are paying them monthly. So you can be able to rework task-based roles where we are saying, look, if a minimum is 6 hours in a day, it has to be 6 hours in a day, and we have to ensure you did 6 hours in a day. And we will quantify that by the amount of work. So as opposed to giving you a deadline and then waiting for when you deliver, we want to see what have you pushed today. So moving into a perspective where I think the word is sprint planning. So sprint planning is where, even if I'm not techie myself, but I know, like, let's say beginning of the week, we've done sprint planning that is expected as a team. This is what we'll deliver. Everybody will do this. So even if I pop into, various meetings, I know what guys are doing. So I think task management is what has helped us to cut costs.
All right. So even as we close, just now on personal reflections, as your time as the leader of Fundis, what's your guiding principles? As well, just slightly touch on Fundis. We've had a very unique culture. How have we kept that up, and how has that helped us be able to stay long even when people are closing? I remember, like, during COVID, it was crazy, but it was still.
Yeah.
How has the guiding principles of the business, which obviously come from you as the leader, how has that been built out, and how do you continue to foster the same?
Well, this is not very conventional, but first thing, I am a faith-driven founder. So faith plays a very, 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 very huge part of building a tech startup. And I'm also incredibly lucky that nearly all our investors currently, and especially the equity investors, are faith-driven, meaning they understand that there is a lot else that goes into a business beyond smarts and knowledge and skills and those kinds of things. So first off, as a faith-driven founder, I usually credit a lot of what we have been able to do I would say, by God's help, from a perspective of there are opportunities that have opened for us, both from investors and from business, and you surely know that wasn't because we qualified for it, but there was some unexplainable favor to that. And I think that gives us an edge over many other, sort of setouts. So that's the first thing. But the next thing for me is I've learned there's a statement that culture eats strategy for breakfast. What that means is strategy is good. Strategy is necessary. It's important to strategize where you want to go, where you see yourself 2 years, 5 years. But without culture being in place, nothing else counts. Culture is what keeps teams and people together when the going gets tough. You see, we say that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. But if there is no culture, the tough will not get going, because when, for example, in the wild, when you see, let's say, a bunch of buffaloes or elephants are attacked, you will always see a strategic positioning perspective where all the young ones are pushed to the center and everybody is watching out for the periphery. So I think culture is what I would keep for that. How do you stick out for one another when there's no money? Because we have had opportunities where we ran out of money and we survived for months on end. I'll give you a good example, which you are aware. I think in July 2023, we ran out of money and a lot of people left, but we had some teams that stuck on till now that we had never met. For example, if you think about our chief technology officer, after 1 year is when I've gone to Nigeria and it's when we have met. How does somebody who you have never seen, you have never met, stick to a vision a year after when there was no money? So I think culture is very, 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 very crucial, and it needs to be understood from day one before anybody comes in. What do we stand for as a group, as a workplace, as a company? For example, some of the values that we hold dear, for example, one of our core values is candor. And candor, simply translated, means candidness. Can I be very, 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 very objective in telling you how I see something, how it needs to work, and there is room for people to speak out their minds? That's a cultural perspective. Care is another value that we hold dear, that regardless who is my boss, do I care about the work that I'm doing, right? So I think culture plays a very, very, very crucial part. And I think we have now gotten to a point where we hire for culture. Mm-hmm. And we'll even forego guys who are very, very, very experienced. But we feel, and I'll give a good example. We hired sometime last year, and in about 2 months, we canceled that contract at a management level because we figured this is not what that will sit with us, 6 months down from now. So I think culture is very, very, very crucial. The example I would give you is building any team is almost like finding people and putting them in a bus. The very crucial thing about why people are getting into the bus should not be about the destination we are going. Because if I got into a bus because of the destination it was going, as soon as the destination changes, those people will start alighting that bus. I see culture is about, I want to join a team because of who else is on that team. Join a team because you like the guys on that team. You like what they stand for. The moment you have that right, that bus, no matter what comes your way, we will figure out where to take the bus. So it's not about the destination. And then what I think is organizational building every day is then now from day one till the last day of the company, which never really comes, is making sure the people on the bus are seated on the right seats. So make sure, is everybody doing the role that they are naturally fitted for, they are passionate for, they are competent for. That's how I would see it. But culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can't do anything else if culture is out of place.
I'll give you the closing word even as we close. What is Alex looking forward to in 2025? What's this that's waking you up early in the morning?
So I'll put it at a personal level and then at a corporate level. So the way I had structured my life is in my 20s to 30s. Those were my building age. So I wanted to have figured out, how do you start something? How do you build something? How do you find resources? Those kinds of things. In my 30s to 40s, I had structured those years to be about, now that I built, how do I scale? How do I sustain something that is big enough? Safaricom was once at a Fundis stage. But the management that was needed at the Fundis stage is not the current management they have for the current stage they are in. It fundamentally takes a different level of skills, and very few founders make to jump through the curves. If you see founders, let's say like Jeff Bezos, founders like the Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, guys who have grown with the organization from very small level to where they have fundamentally have to build different mindsets over different seasons, and that's what I'm trying to build. So in my professional development in my 30s to 40s, this is even when I'm finishing those degrees that I did not complete. That's when I'm still finishing. Is when I'm thinking about, what does scale look like? How do you hire for the next level that we are going to? At a personal level, this is when also now I'm coming to the stage where now you start thinking about raising kids, building a family, and understanding I'm not just a CEO, but I'm also a husband, you are a father, you are a friend, you are a relative. How do you combine all those things? So I feel like I am in a new shift, a new season. So as I'm turning 35 towards the end of this year, I have now 5 years left to make that 10 years a reality. Then past my 50s, I feel those are my ages to give back. And by giving back is when I think, all right, if I want to consider maybe being a professor somewhere teaching entrepreneurship, but also as well as investing in other maybe early stage founders. You've made the money, you've made the connections, you can be able to rally capital, and you can invest in other people that you see, businesses that you work with. So that's where I currently am at.
Yeah. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for
having me.
having
This was a very exploratory conversation.
I
still
appreciate
feel
it.
there's so much you've left, but thank you for being with us. We'll see you in the next episode.